Thank you first and foremost, Jeff, because it's 5 a.m. in New Jersey where you're connecting from. So thank you, thanks a lot. We really, really appreciate it. We were talking about you because, as I told you, there were several of the students in this class who read your book, Public Parks. We have another of your books in the possible reading for the second semester. So after this session, I'm taking that there's going to be even more people reading your books. And we're really, really honored to have you around. So they're here to listen to you. They listen to me a lot of times. They're probably bored of me. So thank you for everything. And well, this is a class of information and communication theory at CEU San Pablo University, March the 30th. And we have the honor to have this prominent guest with us. Thank you again.
Thank you. First, thank you, Roberto, for having me. As I said on Twitter, you're the one person I would do this for, getting up at 5 in the morning when it's still dark here. Because Roberto, I hope you know, class, how lucky you are to have such a generous and wise and just plain nice professor. And when I've come to Madrid, he has been wonderful to me. And of course, I would get up at this ungodly hour for him. Thank you also for buying my book. I would have given you the PDF. Nobody bought the book because it was optimistic, and only pessimism sells these days. So I've been thinking about what to talk to a communications class, and I went back and got some notes of a talk I did in Madrid, actually, at a conference, I think last year. And I pulled out a few slides, which I may or may not use. But what I was thinking about was, imagine this crisis without the internet. Imagine that we couldn't be having class right now, and you'd be stuck at home with no means to continue school. I'd be stuck at home with no means to continue my job. We'd have no mechanism to connect to people, even while we are social distancing. We wouldn't have the means to order from, I don't know if it's Amazon in Spain or whatever the various online services are. We wouldn't have the means to get directly to expertise and information the way we have now. The internet is making this horrible situation, this deadly and mournful situation, at least bearable in some ways. And it makes me wonder whether we should be talking about communications studies anymore or internet studies, whether that has become the thing that matters most to us. Let me see if I can get this slide up. Hold on.
Yeah.
Okay, now do I need to share?
Trying the tool Blackboard on Saturday. It was literally an assault on Twitter, and he just took some time to get the basics of Blackboard. Let me know if I can help.
So there it is. Share content.
Share files, and
it's not doing it.
Yeah, nope. Something's loading problem.
Okay.
It's like by the archivos, so if you send it to my email, I can just upload it if you want. And you're
okay. That's okay. I can send it to you afterwards. So let me go back to the class. So I don't. Otherwise, my fear is that I will end up exiting the class in the computer. So I'll just leave it. I don't normally use slides anyway. So I'll use my hands instead.
Okay.
Imagine. Well, so if we think of the media view of the internet, it says there's a circle, and in that circle there's print and broadcast and net. That the net is just a new medium. I completely and utterly disagree with that view. I think instead, if you envision a larger circle that is, let's call it the internet, but it's the connected society. The way I define the internet is that it connects people with people, people with information, information with information, machines with machines. So there's this new global connection machine that we call the internet. And what's happening in that big circle is that things are getting sucked into it. And so you have social began inside of it. Communication is now almost entirely inside of it. Media is being dragged inside, where very little is left outside in the old world. Education is dragged inside too slowly, but this crisis is making us come a little faster. Finance, retail, crime, government, all these sectors of society are being dragged into this thing that we don't really understand yet, that is this connected society. So that makes me wonder whether we should be studying media as communications or whether we should be studying what this new thing is. Now, I want to be careful that I don't argue that this is a repetition of history or that we ignore history. Quite the contrary. I'm working hard right now on trying to get some concentration to work on a book, which is very difficult, about the book. And to be clear, I love print. I love books. I'm a Gutenberg geek. And it matters greatly to me the history we have so that we can understand better what we have been, so we understand what we've become. So let me give you a timeline. If I were in front of class, I'd be walking either end of the room. But let's start over here. Can you see my hand still? With 1450, which was about the year that Gutenberg began, of course, or he began earlier, but about the year that he began printing the Bible. You go from 1450 to 1605 before the newspaper was invented. That incredibly obvious thing to us, I have a printing press, I'm going to tell people what's happening in the world, was not invented for a century and a half. Now, of course, in that early period, there was much besides books that was printed. There were broadsides and pamphlets in German, Flugschriften, flying type that Martin Luther used and that the church used fighting each other. You have hymns and music and bureaucracy and forms. You have a lot of things that were printed, but not the newspaper. Then you advance to the next major realm was about 1800 when the first real major technological innovations in printing came along, which was stereotyping and the steel press. So 1450 to 1800, the technology stayed with minor advances roughly the same. 1814, a big change happens, which is steam power, so that the press can go fast and we get to mass media. 1840s, we get wood pulp paper, allowing paper to be cheaper. Soon thereafter, the telegraph. 1900, broadcast. 1950, television. Here we are at 2020. What did I leave out? Of course, the internet. And that was approximately 25 years ago, just a little more than 25 years ago, when we saw the creation of the commercial web. And so I mark that as the beginning of the popular internet. Well, if we put that in Gutenberg time, that's 1475. That is to say that we have a very long way to go before we understand fully what the internet is. Again, I'm violating historical rules here by trying to draw a parallel to a past, but screw it. I think that the internet could be as disruptive an invention as movable type was. I'm too old to know whether that's true. You're probably too old to know whether that's true, because it could be generations, centuries even, before we understand what the net is. We always see the future in the analog of the past, right? In English, we called automobiles horseless carriages to start when they started. We called refrigerators ice boxes. We had to make up something that we understood, and that's what we're doing now on the net. We see it as a medium filled with something called content to make something we believe are products that people can own and can sell. That is our Gutenberg way of looking at the world, not an internet way. There are two academics at the University of Southern Denmark named Tom Pettit and Lars Ole Sauerberg, who created a theory they call the Gutenberg parenthesis, which I quite like. So they argue that before Gutenberg, going back over here in the timeline, before Gutenberg, knowledge was passed around mouth to mouth. It was changed along the way. There was very little sense of ownership or authorship. The business model was fairly clear: one scribe, one book, one patron, about a year. The goal of the scribes in the humanistic age was to preserve the knowledge of the ancients, because we believed that in the Dark Ages we were nothing. Then along comes Gutenberg. And now everything fits into a book. It has a beginning and an end, and a neat arc in between. And everything is it's in a container called the book. This is what the Pettit and Zuckerberg say. And now suddenly, knowledge has a new metaphor, and so does our cognition, our sense of the world, that everything has a beginning and an end. The line, and this sentence is an example, says McLuhan, becomes our organizing principle. There's a business model. In 1710, long after Gutenberg, we invent the business model of copyright, and in the Statute of Anne in the UK. And now writing, creativity, communication becomes a product to own. And that becomes the metaphor for how we think of things. And we can sell this thing that we call creativity or writing or communication. The goal is not to preserve the knowledge of the ancients. The goal is to honor the current expert, Herr Dr. Professor so-and-so who wrote a book. Then we come, they argue, to the other side of the parenthesis. And now we're coming out of the Gutenberg age, they say. And now, once again, knowledge is passed around mouth to mouth and click to click. It's remixed and remade along the way. There's less of a sense of ownership and authorship. Things seem less concrete. The business model is once again unclear, so we're fighting about copyright throughout Europe, and we have the new copyright directive of the EU trying to preserve the old way for the old media. The business model, as I say, is unclear, but also the goal is unclear. Is it to preserve the knowledge of the ancients? No. Is it to honor the experts? Well, we're trying to figure that out right now, especially in this crisis. Is it instead to honor the voice of the people, or is it to tear down the institutions? We don't know yet. So I would argue that you are studying this at exactly the right time, because now you can look at what's going on in this world and you can study it as something that is new. And I urge you to do that. Even though you're not as corrupted by the past as I am, you want to try to stop and look and see a dividing line and not so much try to predict the future. I think that futurist is the most bullshit job description ever created because no one can predict the future. But you can look back at the Gutenberg age and say, what did that make us? Now, if I'm saying it that way, I can be accused of technological determinism. There's a lot of fighting and arguing that says that we shouldn't say that the press made us do anything. And I don't think it did make us do anything, but it enabled us to do many things. And it brought out a nature of society. Well, what was that like? What was that nature? How did society work? And what choices are we making now in this new way? And what does that say about society and who we are and what we want to be? So what is this thing? As I said before, I think that the internet is a connection machine, connecting people with information with people, information with information, so you can add up amazing sets of learning, and machines with machines, of course. And so as we understand that, I think we want to reconsider the notion of what communication is and whether communication is the proper umbrella or not. But I'll stipulate that it is because you're in a communications class. I'm an old journalist, very old as you can see. Sorry for my bed hair today. I don't mean to do that to rub it into Roberto. And I'm an old newspaper and magazine guy, right? And that's the world I came from. That's what I knew. And so I believed that what I did for a living was make a product called content, that I was a writer. The internet has changed my view of my profession radically. I was at the World Trade Center on 9/11. A week later, I decided to start blogging because I wanted to understand better what was going on. And 2 days into it, somebody in Los Angeles, who was a friend of a friend, had a blog and wrote about what I'd written and linked to it. And I wrote about that and linked back. Try it again. That was a conversation occurring in different places in different times. That was enabled by the link, the web. And that started to teach me the differences here. It also started to teach me what I should have seen journalism is all along, which is a conversation. There's a wonderful scholar, the late James Carey, who was at Columbia University, who wrote some really, really good books that I would recommend. There's an essay I can recommend to your professor, which I'm sure he already knows, but I quite like that. I want to quote from for a minute. Let me find it here. And Carey says that the essence of what we do is conversation as a society and as journalism. So he says that, I'll quote here for a minute, republics require conversation, often cacophonous conversation, noisy conversation, the kind of conversation we're hearing now. So they often cacophonous conversation, for they should be noisy places. That conversation has to be informed, of course, and the press has a role in supplying that information, but the kind of information required can be generated only by public conversation. The idea of the press as a mass medium, independent of, disarticulated from the conversation of the culture, inherently contradicts the goal of creating an active, remembering public. I love that, because what that says is, and I think that media always should have been seen as a conversation, not as the manufacturing of a product that I sell to you and I control and you don't. The one way, one size fits all view of media. The other thing Carey says in there, as he mentions, is the idea of the mass. And I think that the mass in mass media is a destructive concept. Because what it says is that everybody is all the same. And we kind of had to do that when all we had was a newspaper or a book or a broadcast. We had to create one product for everybody and convince everybody that it was perfect for them. But it never was, especially in the United States, where we see that mass media was controlled by people who look like me, old white men. And young people, African Americans, Latino audiences, LGBTQ audiences were never included or represented or reflected or served. And so we talk these days about trying to restore trust in media. Well, a lot of communities in the United States never had trust in media because it didn't serve them. And then, of course, now we also have the Trumpists, and I'm sorry for what we've done to the world with that man, who think that media doesn't serve them because we weren't honest with them about being liberal, because we are liberal in media. I'm liberal. So I think we need to reconsider media as it stands today and understand it around this idea of conversation. So as a result, I've changed my definition of journalism because I have tenure at a university and I can do obnoxious things like that. And my definition of journalism now is to convene communities into respectful, informed, and productive conversation. I'll say that again. To convene communities, first and foremost, into respectful conversation. By that I mean that if we are not listening to each other, if we do not grant dignity to each other, if we do not act with dignity, we're not going to get anywhere. Informed conversation, of course it has to be informed, but that's the middle of this. And then productive conversation. It has to get somewhere. It's not conversation for conversation's sake. There's a reason to have it, that we're trying to improve our lives and improve society. That's what communication now really is. So we have to have an understanding, I think, of conversation in this realm. We have to have an understanding of community in this realm, which is why we started at the Newmark School, where after you graduate, all of you should come to New York when you're allowed to travel again and study at the Newmark School at CUNY.
You mean after they've done their master course at CEU, they can go to uni, to
yes,
CUNY,
that's
right?
exactly right. After you do that, then you can come to me. And seriously, we are a wonderful school, and we have by the way, we have a bilingual program in Spanish and language journalism, and we also have a new degree, which I helped start, in social journalism. And the idea behind social journalism is we do not start with the story idea. We do not start with the content. We start with the community. And the students find a community that is self-defined. That is to say that somebody else didn't define them, like a bullshit community like millennials, right? That doesn't exist. But a community definition where the students observe and listen to and reflect and empathize with the community and its needs before they decide what to bring into that community. And when they bring something in that community, it may not be stories. Fine if it is, but it may be one student last term was serving women who'd been abused, and she brought the theater of the oppressed to them to bring out their feelings. Another student is serving opioid heroin addicts and is bringing them data for useful resources, and so on and so on. So we understand community, we understand conversation. And then what about information? I think that since the American presidential election, we've been concentrating a lot on disinformation in the country because we feel that suddenly this internet thing took over everything and made everybody stupid and did nothing but distribute disinformation in institutions without trust. Well, yeah, to an extent, but I think we got overboard with that. I think we paid so much attention to Russian trolls and bots and trying to kill them that we got manipulated by them. And every time we debunk some troll, we're just promoting their message. We haven't understood how to do that. But as we come now to this crisis, to the pandemic of the coronavirus, I think we see something new about information, which is not new at all, which is that we have to concentrate on expertise. That we in journalism, speaking for myself, have to see that our primary job now is to amplify the voice of the experts over the amateurs. The amateurs being the President of the United States, the amateurs being TV commentators, the amateurs being columnists in newspapers. What I want instead is experts. So I created a Twitter list, a COVID Twitter list, of 500 epidemiologists, virologists, infectious disease physicians, frontline emergency room physicians, researchers, NGOs, and a few journalists who are good. And I've got 500, last I looked, 36 experts in my Twitter list, and I'll pass on the link to your professor so you can have it. And it enables me to see what the experts say, and it's been incredibly valuable. It's the one thing that gives me hope in all of this is science. I watch these researchers and doctors share questions and information with each other as this thing changes rapidly. I see an entirely new infrastructure of information occurring. I see some controversy about, in the academic world, medical preprints. That is to say, a paper that has not been peer reviewed yet in that long and slow process that I don't know because I'm not a real academic, but Roberto knows. Well, there's no time for that. So they're putting papers up in preprint servers, and there's some controversy about that, right? Some say, oh my God, we shouldn't make that public because it's preliminary information. Idiots like Donald Trump will take an idea like one drug and run with it. We've got to control that information. But other experts say, no. We have to have that information out there so we can all see it, so we can all work with it, so we can all challenge it and understand it better. We just have to put that in context. Well, that should be the job of the journalist. And so I think we risked being in a world of a moral panic. If you know what a moral panic is, it's when basically you see a problem, you think that's the most important problem in society, and you find one party who's fully responsible for that problem. You blame everything for that problem in society on that one party, and that one party becomes the devil to get rid of. And in time, the book was that in some quarters, comic books were that in some quarters, and now in some quarters, especially media, the internet is. That the internet has ruined everything. Well, bullshit. Again, I say, if we did not have the internet right now, we would be screwed. And the internet is a phenomenal and amazing and miraculous tool that we happen to have in this horrible crisis, and it makes this horrible crisis somewhat more bearable. But what comes out of this also then is a rush to regulate the internet, because media say to government, this thing is killing us, it must be bad, tamp it down. So we see laws like the Leistungsschutzrecht, the ancillary copyright in Germany, became the Spanish link tax, which is why you don't have Google News. We have the right to be forgotten, which scares me a little bit. I think that Europe would understand better than anywhere not to rewrite and erase history. We have the new copyright directive, which is old industry saying protect our old ways. This is what the internet has really done. And then we have GDPR, the privacy regulation of Europe, which I think you've read a little bit about, and we can talk about next, and then I'll finish in a minute. Where, let me emphasize, as I said in public parts, for those who read it, privacy matters. It matters greatly. But as we can see today, sharing also matters, especially in this crisis. And I think that we've got to recognize the limits of each. So what's happening in the US right now is that because of our idiot president, we do not have enough tests for the disease. If you think you should be tested, you have to have the symptoms, or you have to say exactly who you were exposed to who has the disease. Well, at my school, one of our colleagues thought that she or he had the disease, but the school couldn't tell us who because of privacy law. So I couldn't go to the doctor and say, yes, I was exposed to so-and-so because I don't know whether I was. Well, what's the limit there of transparency and sharing versus privacy? I would argue that the more we share right now, the better. The problem, the reason the privacy is there is for other reasons that we can deal with legislation. There should be human rights of the sick. If I get sick, God forbid, I shouldn't lose my job or my insurance in this country or my home, or I shouldn't be maligned because I'm just sick. That attitude goes back to the plague, literally to the plague, and the fear that you would be shunned because we didn't know what was wrong with you or how to keep this bad thing from coming to us, so we are going to shun you. Well, we know better now, all in all. Even though in the United States, the state of Rhode Island was going to put up a roadblock against New Yorkers, but the New York governor got rid of that. And in China right now, we see borders coming down between provinces and people rioting on the streets around this. So there's a little bit of the plague still around. But we've got the real problem there is we don't understand science, we don't understand disease, we don't understand empathy. The problem is not the information. So the last thing I want to say is this. Sharing data, and the word data has become a scare word. Like, oh my God, they know things about us. Data is knowledge. And I want to be very careful about laws and regulation that try to control knowledge. The right to be forgotten says you're not allowed to know that once you already know it. I don't know if you saw the movie Men in Black, but there's a pen you can put to the head to forget things. That doesn't exist in the real world, only in the movie. But that regulation acts like we can tell you what you're not supposed to know. Well, in a free society, knowledge flows freely. That is the point of the Gutenberg age, was suddenly now you could take knowledge and set it down in a book, and you could compare it and refer to it and argue with it and communicate around it. That's the beauty we have. And now we have so much more potential information feeding more knowledge through data and connectivity. And so I want to be cautious here about saying that we know what the internet is yet, and thus we know how to define it and limit it and regulate it. No, it's 1475. It's very early. We don't know what it is yet. And when old people like me try to say that we want to try to preserve a past, that's why you learn our perspective, so you can challenge it. And I hope you do. That's what I wanted to say to you this very early morning, and thank you for listening so kindly. So
well, thank you very much.
Now conversation, I hope.
Yeah, thank you for your presentation. It's been really interesting. I mean, this is the third time you've been with us. This is the second time that I've been able to listen to you, and every time I get the same impression that it's just I'm listening history here. It's like, I mean, this is gonna be engraved carved in stone in the future. These reflections are gonna be valid for many decades from now. So I'm really appreciating that you're doing this live for our students right now. The word you know that you have a fan base in the class. So I'm sure that there's going to be people willing to ask you for questions.
Or challenge me, or argue with me, or whatever you like.
Definitely. I have my questions, but I think it's I think that the young generation that has the future in their hands is them. So whatever you want to ask them, maybe if we just because we're not seeing one another, if you want to use the tool for raising your hand to make this organized, and I would just say who can activate the microphone. But yes,
I never use
unlike
Blackboard, so you're still the moderator, right?
I'm still online, and I mean, we're both moderators, so you'll see people raising their hands. But if you want,
no, it's fine. You should run it. I'm not good at this.
It's just as simple as whoever wants to talk, just raise their hand. So just let's give them minutes. Okay, so Mario has the first question. Okay, Mario, you activate your microphone, and if you want to activate your camera, maybe this makes it more personal. We don't have all the cameras at the same time because it might be a bit confusing, but for the time, maybe you can turn your camera and your microphone on if you have it available. Okay.
Okay. I'm trying. Do you see me?
Yes.
Yeah. Good morning. Yeah. I would like to ask you regarding all this theme of privacy you were talking about. What do you think about this illegal surveillance program that there is currently now in the United States, the PRISM program, that they are using like to spy the citizens?
So this is what Edward Snowden revealed in his leak of documents to The Guardian, and it was awful. It was terrible. But this is what I often say is that we think that government is the best protector of privacy. Government is the worst threat to privacy because government has the power to sneak in and tap the lines of the internet and listen to us, and government has the ability to use the power of police and guns and jail and prison and fines and penalties against us. So what we have to control there, in my view, is not the internet, it's government. Now, I want to be careful because when I talk about the internet, I talk about freedoms so much, I'm going to sound like a libertarian. I'm actually a Democrat who can't wait to get rid of Donald Trump and vote for the Democrat. I'm a liberal in the United States. But when it comes to the freedoms of the net, I think it's important to preserve those freedoms because we don't know what they are yet. So PRISM, thank goodness, reveals to us the abuse of these freedoms by government secretly. Now, the word surveillance is an important word these days, and I hear it a lot. I hear it around cookies and advertising, as if this is a surveillance economy and surveillance capitalism in the title of a book lately. And I think that's ridiculous because true surveillance is what government does to us. True surveillance is what Franco did in Spain. True surveillance is what the United States government did in PRISM. Surveillance is when the government violates our privacy and without our knowledge and uses that against us and chills our speech and our action. That is surveillance. So it's quite right to use that word in the context of PRISM, and it's a very serious word that I would argue we have to hold on to and not devalue it by talking about advertising cookies, which don't really harm us, not a big deal. So you happen to know that I bought those boots and you're going to show me those damn boots for 3 weeks looking around. That's not surveillance. Surveillance is when the government with all of its power knows what I know and I don't know it. And that's wrong. So I want to protect the freedoms of the net from government.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Brian. I don't hear you, Roberto. I'm not hearing you.
Yes, I mute my microphone not to sorry. I was just saying that Marcos wants to talk, so if
Great,
you can
Marcos.
just turn your camera and your microphone on, Marcos, please.
Hi. Sure. Yeah, good. Yeah, good morning, Jeff. Thank you very much for being here. I really enjoyed reading your book. I thought it was extremely stimulating, and I think that your devotion for publicness is very necessary in a world that is filled with secretiveness. And I just wanted to ask that back in 2011, when you published the book, you mentioned a lot of tools which permitted the public to become public, which permitted the audience to become public with the help of internet. How do you think that the landscape has changed, and how many tools has the internet provided as of now? Like, how can you make a comparative between now and 2011 when you published the book? Thank you.
I will be honest, I have not had the courage to go back and read the book in detail because I don't know what I got wrong. I wrote a prior book about Google, which I will stand up with. This one I don't know. All the levels of principle I think I'll stand up to, and I still believe what I believe. But you're right. The question is, how did the tools turn out? How did our use of them turn out? And of course, the obvious one is Facebook and the problem of Facebook. And in full disclosure, I raised money for my school from Facebook for some projects. I don't receive any money personally from Facebook, but just so you know. And I come off sometimes as a defender of the platforms of Google and Facebook and Twitter. And what I say is I'm not really defending them. I'm defending the freedoms of the net that they represent. And they may or may not be the best proprietors of those freedoms. Oftentimes they're not. Facebook can do some really stupid things. And it makes it hard to like them sometimes. But I think we have to understand what Facebook is in a few ways, and Twitter as well. I also hear people say, oh my God, Facebook and Twitter are filled with Nazis and horrible, awful things. Well, I don't know about you, but my Twitter feed and my Facebook feed are filled with my friends and very nice people and smart people. And they have blocking tools, and I can get rid of them. And for me, it's fine. Does misinformation travel on Facebook and on Twitter? Yes, absolutely. But in the United States, misinformation also travels on Fox News and every night now in the president's briefings. Misinformation exists and is amplified by media. So media have a role in this they're not admitting. But Facebook. Siva Vaidyanathan, who's a brilliant author at the University of Virginia, who I love as a friend, but he and I disagree about much. He attacks Google and attacks Facebook. And he thinks that, I'm going to unfairly characterize it, but just for the sake of one sentence, he thinks that companies will be companies and the public will be the public, and that connecting all people, as Facebook does, is a mistake because it leads to what we see. I disagree. I think that it can lead to wonderful things. And what we're doing right now is we're in a process of negotiating our norms in society. I remember when somewhere in my closet over there is Google Glass. I don't know if you remember that, the stupid glasses you'd wear where you could see things, right? And it had a camera on them. I was stupid enough to buy it. That's how much of an optimist I am. And I remember there was a lot of fear at the time. Oh my God, people are going to go into the gym locker room and the restroom with this camera and they're going to take pictures. Well, what would make you think that this little device is suddenly going to make us all uncivilized assholes? No, people didn't walk into the gym taking the picture, or they took the thing off, or whatever. We were negotiating a norm, a way to behave. Facebook was new, and we're negotiating, and Twitter are new, and we're trying to negotiate the norms of what is being a troll versus what is being civilized. And I think a lot of people use the tool to be assholes, to yes, do the equivalent of taking the picture in the bathroom, to be mean to people, to be hateful. But that doesn't mean that the entire tool is wrong because of all the other good things that can happen. And in this crisis right now, Facebook's traffic has gone up 50% because people are depending on it to connect in a socially distanced world to be socially close again. And the New York Times had a story, or the Washington Post, one of them had a story. This is Mark Zuckerberg's chance to redeem himself in this crisis. I think that may be true, is to prove the value of this. So I think the real problem with the tool, finally, to answer your question, because it was a good question, I had to buy time. I think the problem with the tool is that it believed too much in freedom and good behavior and didn't understand how a small, I emphasize small number of people would exploit the tool for bad and make it bad for everyone. And so thus, it needed to have more controls, more mechanisms. Facebook just started an oversight board. And I think it's a decent idea because they want to have principles. But and they invited me and a bunch of others to a whole bunch of meetings trying to understand what it ought to be. And I said the one thing that's missing from the oversight board is a North Star, is a principle of why does Facebook exist in society? How is it going to make society better? And what is okay on Facebook and what is not okay on Facebook? And what does Facebook itself say is acceptable and not acceptable? And it is frightened to death of making those decisions because it's expensive. I'm not saying they're greedy about this. I'm just saying it's complicated, that they can't figure out how to monitor and have an impact on the conversation of 2 billion people. Scale is our friend because scale enables people never heard to be heard. But scale is our enemy because scale makes it impossible to find and track down and deal with the people who would exploit and ruin that experience. And so Facebook doesn't have those tools. It doesn't have those mechanisms. Neither does Twitter. And in this crisis, they're learning new ways to do it. They're making decisions they didn't make before. They're taking accounts down for bad information, which they need to do. So they need to do more, but also we need to do more. We need to develop the skill of ignoring the assholes and ignoring the ignorant and ignoring the wrong. And what professional media should be doing is helping people do that. And so there's a lot to learn. It's 1475. We don't know what this is yet. I think Facebook is still a valuable and useful tool, but I think it has a lot to learn.
Thank you very much. We're very lucky to have you here, and thank you also, Roberto, for making this possible.
Thank you, Marcos, for the question, and thanks, Jeff, for the reflection, which really applies to the modern landscape that we have. There are 2 more questions. Macarena came first, so Maca, if you can just activate your camera and your microphone, and then we'll go with Elena.
Hi, can you hear me?
We can hear, we can't see you. So
but I have a problem with my camera. It is not working at all. I don't know.
That's okay. There's okay. We'll do, yeah.
Okay, so my first question is, I love the chapter in the book when you talk about Germans and the issue they have with Google. I found it really interesting. You say that they don't like being on the internet, like on Google Earth. But they don't care when, for example, when you talk about the spa, I think it was, or something like that,
yeah,
that they see each other naked and they don't even care. So why do you think that is? Why do they have that behavior?
So I'm not sure. I have this debate with many German friends, and I love going to Germany like I love going to Spain, and I can't wait until I can do it again. And I have this debate with them about both their privacy and their publicness. And they argue about the privacy. They say that it's because of World War II and the Stasi and their political history. And I say, well, okay, probably. But my wife's family is half German. Her grandfather and grandmother, who I dearly loved, came over from Germany in 1923, and they were extremely private. Her opa would say, you mustn't tell people that. No one needs to know that. I think it's part of the German culture to be very private. and be very protective. And I also talk with friends there who try to start companies. And I'm not trying to make, I'm about to make stupid generalizations about an entire people, but fine. I did it in the book anyway. Entrepreneurs in Germany complain that they can't get money for their companies there because German investors are risk averse, that they don't like risk. And so the entrepreneurs end up coming to America, where we love risk, we love failure, to get their money, and thus there's a drain of creativity out of Germany to America, and they resent that, my God, the Americans keep buying everything, damn them. Well, I think this comes out of a fear of failing in public, a fear of being embarrassed in public, a social anxiety. And the internet could make it better, but it makes it worse because it brings that up for them. Now, in terms of the nakedness, if you go into a German sauna, it's men and women all naked. And to an American, that's shocking the first time you see it and do it, which I have. But that's a commentary not so much on the Germans as on Americans, right? Our puritanical roots, that all this is bad, what we are is bad somehow. It goes to John Calvin and the religious views of the Puritans that we're all sinful and we're all bad and we all have to guard against that. That's an American problem, not a German problem. But the two cultures then clash and we don't understand each other because now in society, of course, we're connected. And so we're much closer with each other and those conflicts are going to come out. So part of the paradox of the net age is that it tears down borders, yet we see borders going up, right? Donald Trump is building walls. The UK is cutting bridges because we're protecting what we knew, what we thought we were in a world where that's challenged by our connections with other people. That's fascinating, and I don't know how it's going to turn out. So I think that little tale about the Germans in the sauna and the blurring of photos in Google Maps is really a tale about cultural differences and trying to understand them, and technology forces us to grapple with them.
Thank you very much. Can I ask a second question?
Please.
I'm so sorry, I'm his friend and I want to take advantage of this. When you talk about Facebook, the chapter about Facebook, you said that Mark Zuckerberg makes us do what he wants us to do, but we are still using Facebook and we're still doing that. Why do you think we are not able to see that?
Yeah, I think Zuckerberg would regret what he said to me in the book, that he called himself a social engineer, which sounds like he's a puppeteer controlling the strings. Except the truth is he's not. Part of the argument about Facebook is the algorithm is making us do things. The algorithm is controlling us. The algorithm. Well, the truth is, if we were so easily controlled, there wouldn't be any trolls. There wouldn't be any assholes. He'd be able to make it a happy place for everybody, but he can't, because he can't control us. And my definition of a platform is that if you make something you call a platform, you know it's a platform when your users take it over and do things with it you never could have imagined, when they have control of it, not you. Well, that's what happened with Facebook. The public has control of it, not Zuckerberg. I was going to say Gutenberg, not Zuckerberg. And so yet we from the outside are saying, God damn it, Mark, control the world. So on the one hand, the paradox he's stuck in is he's accused of being the puppet master of the world, and then he's accused of being a very bad puppet master. And we can't have it both ways in our criticism of him. We either have to expect a platform where people will be people and we'll learn how to ignore it, or we want a platform that's highly controlled and we are going to agree how it should be controlled. But clearly, it's going to be very hard to reach that agreement. Because on Facebook, for example, Facebook says no naked breasts, no Germans, no breastfeeding, Well, mothers properly said that's ridiculous. Breastfeeding is a beautiful thing. How dare you? So they had to change their rule and say it's okay to have the breast on Facebook. Well, that's a negotiation of norms that's occurring. And the problem is in a platform is there's not going to be a one-size-fits-all rule. That's left over from our idea of mass media, where we're all the same and we're all going to agree that everything is equal. No, that's not our world now. We're going to disagree, and we're going to end up disagreeing on and about Facebook. And he hasn't figured it out yet, and we haven't figured it out yet.
Thank you, Gav. Thank you, Maka, for the questions.
Thank you very much.
Two more. Elena went after Maka. So Elena, if you can turn your microphone on, and if you have your camera available, that will also work really well now. Not sure that Elena can hear us. Yes.
Good morning.
Good morning, Elena. We can hear you. We can't see you. Do you have your camera available?
Yes.
Okay, I can't see you. I don't know if Jeff can see you.
Can you?
Nope.
Okay, well, maybe
That's
you
okay.
can start your question. Yeah.
Okay, wait. What did video?
Now we can hear you.
Okay, great. So, good morning, Jeff and Roberto.
Good morning. That's a very nice background. You look like you're on stage. I like that. That's
So, first of all, thank you for being here. That's really great, and we appreciate a lot that you being with us in this difficult times right now. So, well, my question is, so 3 years after you published Public Parts, you published Geek Spearing Gifts, and this is the next book we might analyze for the next for just
For my assignment, she doesn't know how to say it in a nice way, but it's something that I'm going to examine them about.
Yes. So yes, we have to.
I'm sorry. I'm causing you this pain. Yes.
No. But we have to choose between 5 or 6 books, and yours is one of the next on the list. And well, I wanted to ask you if what's the difference maybe between Public Parts and this ones, like maybe not just the topic, but maybe what did you improve between the Public Parts and this book? Because I did, well, my analysis was about Public Parts and I did very good, but maybe what did you improve between Public Parts and this book, and maybe what's different? Maybe you could tell us a little bit about this book.
Sure. And by the way, I'm happy to send.
It's asking for the answer, Jeff. So can you just make the assignment on Geek Spearing Gifts?
No, not that.
Well, I'm also, by the way, not to try to get more readers, but I'll remind me, I will send you the PDF so nobody has to buy it.
Really nice of you.
It'll be free. So Geek Spearing Gifts was we published it at the school in a press at the school because it's really about journalism and nobody cares about journalism, so it's very small. But the idea was that okay, smartass, now that your internet has ruined everything, including journalism, what are you going to do about it? And so I wrote my prescription for what I think journalism should be. I looked at new relationships, new forms, and new business models. And the whole idea is that it takes what I learned in Public Parts and tries to bring that to journalism in the sense of saying what I just talked to you about earlier. It's what I'm learning every day is how do we have a journalism that is based on community and conversation. And it was the book actually inspired the dean and me to start the new degree with Carrie Brown called Social Journalism. What does a relationship-based, community-based journalism look like? So I try to propose a journalism that is no longer mass media, that instead listens to and understands communities, exactly what I talked about before. And I tried to argue that it could come in new forms, And then I said that I tried to answer the question of how do we support and sustain this journalism economically. Well, that's the part I screwed up, because I argued that we saw the beginning of a new model that I loved, which was the hyperlocal blog, the blog that serves a town or a community. And we did research, and we found that there were bloggers who made money doing this, who could get $100,000, even $200,000 a year in ad revenue. Hallelujah, right? So I believed that was a building block for a new ecosystem of news, that you would have a bunch of small things run by journalists serving communities, and then you'd have some larger things serving cities or nations. I was wrong, completely wrong. And I wrote a post about a year ago, which I can also send, if you're not completely sick of me by now, in which I said, what if I ran a newspaper? Not that that's ever going to happen. And I admitted my errors from Geeks Bearing Gifts. And I still argue for a relationship-based strategy. And I've still tried to get newspapers and magazines to do this. But the managing editor of a newspaper said to me when I came to visit and he talked to the staff, he said, Jarvis is here telling us to build a new house. Well, we already have a house, and that house is on fire. It's burning down. And every day the publisher is coming and saying, our traffic is going down. Give me more traffic. Give me more cats and Kardashians. And then the ad prices go down. It says, I need more traffic to make that up. Throw more cats on the fire. And we need to preserve this old thing we have. And so then there's Jarvis who's saying, well, forget that, build a new house. But he doesn't even have the blueprints for the new house. He has no plans. He says experiment. Well, we can't really afford to experiment. And what I'm seeing, I think, is going to happen tragically, especially now in this crisis. Some newspapers are going to die because their financial situation is so precarious. And we need to be ready to rebuild journalism from the ashes, but not rebuild what it was, rebuild what it can be. And I've seen that my biggest mistake in Geeks Bearing Gifts, so you asked me for mistakes in public parts, well, I'm already going ahead to say I made mistakes in Geeks Bearing Gifts. My biggest mistake is that I was not radical enough. And that I think that I'm probably too old to be that radical. But this is why what I want to do now is I want to bring in other disciplines and ask them, what's the problem you see and how would you solve it from your perspective? So, for example, if communities are not getting along, if they're hating each other, why don't we bring in anthropology, which understands communities, and have them reimagine how journalism should operate? If the problem is that we're making, as a society, really stupid decisions like Donald Trump, electing him, well, why is that? Maybe we need to bring in neuroscientists to understand how the brain operates and rethink how to inform people based on new assumptions. I read a wonderful book, which I wrote about, called How History Gets Things Wrong, something about our addiction to stories and the problem with stories and the presumption of stories. And how there's an ego to the story to think we know how things begin and end. It's a Gutenberg era notion, the story. And maybe the story is the wrong organizing principle of journalism. Maybe we need to invent a new journalism that is after the story. My fellow professors would kill me for saying this. So yeah, I got things wrong in public parts, and I learned a lot there, but it also taught me a lot about this idea of conversation. So when I came to looking at journalism through that lens and James Carey, and trying to understand this notion of conversation and bringing that to journalism. And now I'm trying to write a book about the end of the Gutenberg age, and what we can learn about ourselves and society looking back, so that we can make decisions differently looking forward. So I'll send you the PDF. I will warn you that it's really boring and wonky. Maybe you should pick a different book. And I'll warn you that I made some mistakes, but you can see what those mistakes are. They're now evident.
Would you say you got a better feedback on public parts than on Geeks Bearing Gifts?
Yeah. So in American publishing, you have the hardback book, and then there comes a time when the publisher decides to print a paperback book. And when it came to public parts, when the time came to print the paperback version in the US, the publisher said, why would I throw good money after bad? That is to say, no one bought the book, no one's going to buy it in paperback. No. So yeah, I got attacked by Morozov. Some of you read. I was seen as a defender of the internet. Yeah, I got some. I mean, I got good response to public parts, but I also got bad response. And basically, nobody bought the book because only dystopia sells. Geeks Bearing Gifts is a very small book for a small audience, and it is useful to me to have when people say, "Hey, smartass, what should journalism be?" I have something to point to that says that's what my thinking is.
So Rocío, are you around and willing to connect?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you. We can't see you, but you can start formulating the question and then try to get the camera on.
Okay, can you see me now?
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I'm a bit ill because I got a cold, so maybe I'll be coughing all the time, but I'm sorry.
Wash your hands. Wash your hands.
Yes.
And stay well.
Okay, this might be, I'm sorry, I'm very nervous. This might be a very silly question, but I'm just curious to know. Like you always, in the book, you talk about all the benefits about being public. And even though you know the disadvantages, you try to be as public as possible. You write everything in your blog and in Twitter and all of this. So have you ever had regrets about being this public or had any bad experiences about it, or I don't know if you know what I mean.
Yeah, no, I do. The short answer is no. I have no regrets. As I say in the book, I had prostate cancer, which means that I told the world that my penis wasn't working. You cannot be more public than that. There's nothing more public than that. And my German friends think I'm insane for having said that. But as a result, I had people who came to me with advice and gave me information and resources I couldn't have gotten. And I was able, to this day, people come to me and say, I just got the diagnosis. Can you tell me what's going to happen? And I can try to, even though I'm not a doctor, I can try to, share my experience with them. As I mentioned in public parts, there was one guy who said that I overshared. But as I said, I thought that he over-listened to me. The only regrets I would have, I would say, are probably two. One is that I try very hard not to step on anyone else's privacy, which is to say my family, right? Their lives are their lives, and I shouldn't drag them into what I do. The other day, my wife went to the supermarket where they have an hour for old people like us, so over 60. My wife just turned 60. And she got, as we say, I don't know what you call it, an American bar, if they want to see if you're old enough to drink, they card you, they ask for your identification. Well, she said she was being carded in reverse. Was she old enough to go to the store? So I said, can I tweet that? And she said, okay. And so I did, and it got lots of reaction, and it was okay, but I had to ask her. And there were a few moments where I said things about myself and my life that ended up being involved in my wife and my kids. The second thing is I regret when I've been an asshole. I regret when I've had too much wine at night and I get angry at somebody and I get going and I say stupid things that I shouldn't say. But all in all, I'm very glad I've been public. I've gotten tremendous benefit out of it.
Okay, thank you.
Gracias.
Okay, sorry, I was moving myself. I was experiencing some problems, but we had another question from Paula. I don't know if you can connect now, Paula.
Hi. Well, I'm connecting my camera.
That's perfect. If you can start formulating the question for Jeff.
Sorry? Well, I won't connect my camera because, well, my question was that it's related with Rocío's one, and that how did you end up publishing all your life? Because, I mean, I know you are a journalist, but in what point of your life did you decide that being that much public on Twitter or on your personal blog would be a good idea and something like that?
Right. Let me be clear that it's possible for me, because I am an American white man. I'm in privilege. We're in power still, which is exactly what Trump's about, is trying to hold on to that power. So it's easier for me to be public than it is for someone who is going to be attacked because they're a woman, or because they're African American, or because they're gay or lesbian. So I'm very conscious of that. But with that privilege, I found a lot of benefit. Now, before I was a blogger, I was a columnist on a newspaper, where in a column you try to have your own perspective. So I was used to being somewhat public in that way. So blogging felt very natural to me. And I have a big ego. And so this feeds my ego to think anybody could possibly care what I have to say. But it came again after 9/11. It came after sharing my experience of that day from being at the World Trade Center and seeing that the response, the empathy, and the perspectives that I got, I found to be very, very valuable. And also then, as a journalist, I learned, as a lot of good journalists have finally learned, that when you open up what you're working on, people can help you with it. Indeed, I think this week I'm going to interview a few scientists about what they think journalism should do. What I've learned about this is that we as journalists, real quickly, in our main degree at the school, we require students, the first thing they do is they come in and they come up with a bunch of story ideas. In social journalism, we don't do that, because we say you haven't listened to the community yet. You don't know the community yet. You start by listening to the community and understanding the community's needs, and that determines the journalism you do. Similarly, on the coronavirus, I realize we shouldn't decide what the stories are. We need to go to the scientists, the experts who know what they're doing, and they should help guide the journalism we do. And so this week I'm going to interview, same way, a scientist who's been very critical of the New York Times, and ask him, what should journalism do? So being public is also being collaborative. And that's the real benefit from it. So there's a professional benefit from publicness, which is that I can benefit from the knowledge of others who are very generous.
Thank you, Jeff. We have a last question, trying just to fit it in everything before half past. So Alejandro, if you can just make the last question, you have the honor.
Yeah, I don't know if you...
We started to hear you, but we can't hear you now. Can you just say something else?
I had the other day some problems with the camera, so we'll go just...
No problem. You're well.
It's a different question. Just you, as a journalist, what do you think of what's your opinion about the fake news that are published on purpose, like by the journalists that know that that news fake just because they had or they have a clear intention, just, well, for example, you're against Donald Trump or to support Donald Trump?
So in the U.S., there's a brilliant woman named Claire Wardle, who's now working out of our school, started something called First Draft, which is dealing with disinformation. She tells us not to use the phrase fake news because Donald Trump took that over, and he now calls all news fake news. And if he doesn't like it, he calls it fake news, whether or not it's true. So I think we have to be careful of using that idea and instead look at disinformation and misinformation. Right? Misinformation is you're wrong about something. And Claire argues that in the coronavirus crisis, most of the wrong stuff is coming innocently from someone who doesn't know better. Just last night, somebody I know who's on TV all the time put up a video of a doctor, who came and told people how to clean their groceries for coronavirus. And he was putting fruit in soapy water and washing it for 20 seconds. Don't do that. And there was then an article from experts saying why he was wrong and why that's dangerous. Well, he wasn't being malicious. He wasn't trying to do disinformation. He was trying to help people. He was just wrong. And it was an innocent but dangerous mistake. So the internet could come very quickly, and I sent those links to my friend who's on TV and said, you might not want to listen to this guy. You might want to listen to these virologists who know what they're talking about. So we're always going to have people who are wrong. I'm wrong. We're all wrong. The scientists are wrong. They learn through being wrong. So that's how we advance. Then there's disinformation. Then there's people who want to exploit a situation, who want to be propagandists. We have to recognize that those people exist and that they're going to do things that try to exploit the weakness of the internet. The weakness of the internet is the strength of the internet. It's freedom. And the weakness of a democracy is the strength of democracy. It depends on information. And so, just to pick on him, Vladimir Putin can come in and exploit both those weaknesses, freedom and dependence upon information, by using the freedom to put out bad information and convince people of it. And this is why I think we need to have neuroscientists tell us how the brain operates so that we can help educate people in different ways. So yes, there's disinformation out there. There's fake news out there. There's always going to be that, always. And I think the effort of the last few years has been trying to kill it, tamp it down. We have a game in the US called whack-a-mole. Moles come up out of holes, and you try to hit the holes and get rid of them. We're going to lose at that. Instead, we have to teach people how to make judgments on their own. Now, some people call that media literacy. I don't, because media literacy is media-centric, as if the media has been right. Well, media screw up too. It's got to be public-centric. It's really one simple word is the cure for all of this. It's what you're doing right now. It's education.
Well, I think that's the best way to possibly finish this meeting. Thanks, Alejandro. Thanks, everyone that contributed with your questions, and especially a big thanks to you, Jeff. I'd like to, stop the recording now.